Welcome to the first episode of Med Matters, Insights and Innovations. This is a medical education podcast intended to give you all the tips, tricks, and insights that you may need as a medical educator. I am Omar Young. I am a maternal fetal medicine specialist, and I have been working in academic medicine for over 10 years. This is a podcast that is sprung out of passion for wanting to teach the next generation, for wanting to see how we can contribute to our patients, to the betterment of their health, to decreasing healthcare disparities, to improving the lives of all of those around us. It's a way to re-inspire and reinvigorate the reason why we all went into medicine. And I wanted to do it in a format that's, easily consumable, readily available, and that makes it fun. This first episode is really an introduction to this podcast and wanting to understand exactly why do we even care about medical education and why do we even care about being in academic medicine? If we think about baking a cake, what are the ingredients that are necessary for that cake? You need the eggs, the flour, the sugar, maybe a little bit of fruit, whatever you want to put in your cake. The same can be applied to academic medicine and being a medical educator. What are those necessary ingredients that are needed to be the best medical educator possible? If you really want to know the answer to that question, this is the podcast for you. And this is our first episode. I'd love to introduce my co-host for this episode, Dr. Abhishek Shripad, and I'll let him introduce himself. How are you?
I'm doing well, Omar. Thanks for involving me with this. And like Omar said, my name is Abhishek Shripad. I am a urogynecologist. I'm in my third year of practice and interested in pursuing a career in medical education, and being a clinician educator. We thought that this might be a nice opportunity to compare, contrast, and learn from a more junior level attending to, like Omar said, several years into practice. So I'm excited to be here. And Omar, one of the things that you mentioned is sort of this kind of so many ingredients going into a career in academic medicine and medical education. Increasingly, it seems like there are so many different paths that folks who are graduating from residency and fellowship can take in medicine. Why do you think clinicians at this point go into academic medicine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think honestly, we are so trained to be in academics just because that's how we grew up. We as physicians are used to having regimented timelines to our lives. So 4 years of college, 4 years of med school. In OBGYN, you get 4 years of residency, and for those of us who are subspecialists, up to 2 to 4 years of post-residency training. And so we really aren't exposed sometimes to private practice or industry or any other options besides academic medicine. But I think one of the things that motivates individuals to be in academics is the environment that academics creates. And so recently, the American Medical Association interviewed graduating residents to say, why did you choose to stay in academic medicine for those that did choose to do that? And the overwhelming majority stated that they wanted to be in an environment that was on the cutting edge of new innovations and technologies, being exposed to research, having access to community collaborations, and getting to see those most complex patients and being able to use all the skills and tools that you learned from training for those really, really hard and tough cases. So I think being in academics is, every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, what am I going to see that's new or what's going to challenge me or what's going to frustrate me? It's never, ever a dull moment in academic medicine. I don't know what your experience is,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's, it echoes a path that I kind of found myself on very similarly when I was thinking about careers. And I think probably we were on a similar sort of reading spree prior to this podcast because I saw a survey distributed by the AAMC with the 25 different institutions, just basically asking folks that are in their careers, why do they work in academic medicine? And similar to sort of the themes that were identified by graduates or, soon to be graduates, the four themes that they found were folks really liked variety, intellectual stimulation, service. And to me, what really resonated was fulfilling relationships. And there's this kind of dynamic and fluid learning that can happen not only when you're a senior level trainee, but as you transition into your academic career, which I found to be something that was really powerful and I think motivates a lot of people.
Yeah, those relationships are actually really super important. I was actually in private practice for a hot second, and I find in academics there is a relationship of collaboration, and wanting to just better yourself and being able to learn new skills that you can put into practice. And I think it's just, you know, something that inspires me every day to try to understand what is going to tell me how to take care of patients better. And that's why, for me personally, that's why I'm in academics.
Yeah, and there's great, I think we both see that there's so much great work being done in all types of medicine, private practice, academic practice, but certainly the things that make you tick on a daily basis are different when you're in this setting. And that might be a nice kind of segue for us to think about what we're trying to talk about on this podcast, which is education.
Hmm.
Academic medicine has multiple facets that you can speak to. And how do you think education is fitting into that mission, and how maybe should it?
Yeah. So, we always talk about this tripartite academic mission of clinical education, clinical care, and research. And we've all seen those fancy graphics of that triangle. But what does that mean? And so everyone always is talking about patient care, which is totally legitimate. This is the reason why we went into medicine to take care of patients. And everyone's always talking about research and funding for research, and that is going to allow us to take care of patients. But we always put education, for some reason, at the bottom of that ladder, even though it is a co-equal branch of the academic mission. Now I sound like the government. Um, but education really is the foundation upon which clinical care and research are built. And so if we aren't able to fundamentally teach our residents and fellows those skills that are necessary to be the practitioners that we want them to be, both inside the operating room as well as outside the operating room. We very well can't, get angry or upset if we have physicians who are constantly calling consults for what we think are basic things. We can't be upset when someone is not able to perform a certain procedure that we would expect a general OBGYN to perform, for example. And so I think it behooves us to really sit down with ourselves and understand exactly what is education. It's not just, sitting in a classroom and me spoon feeding information to you, right? Adults really hate sitting down and reading things and just listening to lectures. Crazy. Adults really need to be tactile. They need to use multiple modalities in order to learn. So is that something that is kinesthetic? Is that something that's going to involve an activity? Is it something that's going to involve like a race or something like that? Adults need to be motivated to learn, to move from that extrinsic factor of oh, I gotta teach because it's part of my job or it's in my contract or I get a certain bonus for that, to an intrinsic motivation that, oh my God, I'm teaching the next generation of learners and I see that, I had this one intern who knew nothing about holding a scalpel in day one, and now they can do a full complex laparotomy at the end of their chief year. That is amazing. Um, yeah. And so I'm wondering, how do you see education in this whole grand scheme of things?
Well, it's coming from, again, I've been out of fellowship now. This is my third year, and coming into sort of a career where I really want to pursue medical education. The things you said to empower a resident or a fellow that you're training it's a tall order, when you yourself are walking into, in most cases, a new institution, unless somebody stays where they went to residency or fellowship. So, on one hand, you're trying to get used to the place, get to know the people, get to knowing how to do your job without the adult in the room, with your attending as it was in fellowship or residency. And it's a tall order to be able to walk in on day one and, be asked to do all of those things. And I think you know, one of the things that I found helpful to think about, and I've had mentors say over the years, is when you think about getting back to the mission of education, is there are a lot of ways that that can look for, graduates. There can be folks that, like you said, are really great hands-on teachers. There are folks that might be really good at curriculum design or, researching medical education. And so I think that there's a lot of different avenues that we can, empower our junior learners as they're thinking about a career in academic medicine to pursue that might fit their personality, that might fit where they kind of are headed in terms of how clinically busy or research busy they want to be.
Yeah,
Um,
and like there are multiple avenues in academic medicine to teach. So it's not just, giving a lecture like once a year, right? It's about sitting down with the learner and asking them at the beginning of an educational opportunity, what are your goals and objectives for today? I guarantee if someone were to ask a learner that, the learner would be taken aback because they are so used to being in situations where they're just essentially being spoon-fed information, or as probably when you or I were in training, being pimped about information. But I
oh yeah.
think it memories. But I think it really is important for us to establish a relationship with our adult learners because they're adults, right? They're not little kids. And so asking someone simply, welcome to my office, welcome to my clinic. What is your goal today? What do you want to learn? What do you want to know about? And so that allows me as the teacher to really tailor my lesson to you, per se, but also you feel like that you've gotten stuff out of it that's really substantive and you're really inspired to then say, oh, so and so really taught me something that I really wanted to know. Maybe I feel comfortable opening up and having more of a learning receptivity. And so I think that's really super important, particularly for academic faculty.
Yeah. And I think, what resonates with me when you say that is sort of anchoring back to one of the themes that a lot of people identify as something that drew them to a career in clinical education, which is sort of that, relationship building, whether it's, over the course of 4 years with residents or, 2 or 3 years with fellows. I think sometimes that one thing that can be challenging is if you have your medical student who's coming in for an afternoon in your clinic and you have to sort of forge that dynamic with them. But I think the way you phrased it as to sort of have a moment of pause, welcome them in and meet them where their, learning is, where their knowledge base is, their learning style is a lot easier said than done. I think we
Hmm.
can all attest to that in the midst of a busy clinic. But I think that, that's one way to kind of think about the, barriers that might exist with our, fast-paced clinical world that we live in while, maintaining education as sort of what we believe to be the position it should be in.
Absolutely. And you raise a fair point. We are subjected to multiple things throughout the day, like the pressures to generate RVUs, the multiple epic chats, the staff messages, the interruptions to clinic or patients showing up late or patients being added on, and the multiple pressures that a physician practicing 21st century medicine has to deal with that people really don't talk about in medical school and should or even in residency education. We probably should do a better job of that. But that then asks the question, with all these pressures, people are going to get burnt out or even say, hey, I don't want to teach, I don't want to educate because I've got to like generate the money. I've got to, you know, fulfill the terms of my grant. So how do you, in your opinion, how would you say like we get people re-inspired and reinvigorated for this mission of education in academic medicine?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of kind of potentially structural changes we can all advocate for, and then personal changes or personal mindset kind of shifts that we can all have. I think naturally, as somebody who is walking into a world where, your promotional track is very much predicated on these objective, very measurable outcomes, whether it's publications, RVUs, educational roles. Of course, there's a crunch there. And I think that if there's flexibility in ways to do that in demonstrating scholarship activity, I feel like that's one way to get people interested and excited about organically pursuing the things they want to without being on a regimented timeline that might not fit where they are in their career or their
Mhm.
interests, and certain things evolve at different rates. I mean, I think the other thing personally and sort of like a mindset shift that, I think is helpful is, the education and the empowerment of the learner and bringing the learner along is baked into the success of the day. Obviously, clinical outcomes, patient care is atop that list, but I think that there are ways that we can think about our days that revolve around, these small successes, whether it's a medical student who you might not see in a clinical setting again, or your resident that you've been working with for 4 years. I think sort of a cultural value to having an educational win on a daily basis is something that can be a little bit of fuel in the sort of long line of things we have to do and things we have to do promotionally and things like that. So that's kind of my like 1,000 foot view. What about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it really is a resetting of the culture, right? And so getting everyone on board to be part of the educational mission. And so the fact that you are in academic medicine really implicitly says, hey, I want to teach. And I totally recognize that when I was in training and then becoming a junior attending, no one really taught me how to teach per se. Um, no one really teaches you that when you are in training. Um, and so some faculty, it's totally understandable that they might shy away from wanting to engage in education just because they don't know how. And so I think it's tools like this podcast and other things that are present that will enable someone to tap into that potential. And I think everyone has it. I think we just have to excavate it, right? And so I think everyone should just step back for a second. You were in the position of being that person that knew nothing, or people talked about you and said that you didn't know anything, but you thought that you were great. How did you feel in that situation? Put yourself in that learner's shoes because you were there. How would you feel if someone like you then came to your office now? How would you want to make them comfortable?
Yeah.
What would you want them to learn? What would you want them to take away from your interaction? Because it's these interactions that students and residents have that will stay with them for the duration of their careers, both good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah.
And so it's super important that we take away those barriers and um, let faculty shine.
That's so true. And there's so much as a learner that you just pick up without direct instruction. You learn so much from how an attending modeled patients and, just welcoming you in. So I think that's an exciting point to kind of, get our listeners cued in and what to expect for the rest of the season here. So, any thoughts about kind of what our listeners can expect as we tackle some of these issues that we've brought up?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an exciting season of MedEd Matters. This is going to be the podcast for you to really tap into your innovation in education, to your ability to be the best educator that you can be. Throughout this season, we're going to be talking about educational timeouts. We're going to be talking about how to engage in education scholarship. What is education scholarship and research? We're going to talk about the beast that is feedback, how to give it, as well as how to receive it. And also, we're going to be discussing what is exactly involved in remediation and how to deal with what we call the problem learner. And so, this whole series is really for you. It's for you to reignite that fire in medical education, to be the best example of a medical educator to our learners, as well as to how to use education as a foundation for your own careers. As part of every episode of MedEd Matters, we're going to do just a quick MedEd moment and something to leave you with as a key tip from each episode. And so, Dr. Shripa, what is your MedEd moment from today's episode?
So my meta moment, I think, is what sort of you just said a little while ago about the moment of pause. I think that the things oftentimes when you run into a difficult, moment as an educator, it's oftentimes because your sense of pace and time of the day has just accelerated so much. When if you realize, if you pause and think about what does my learner need and um, what does this situation call for? Oftentimes it's a very simple fix that, I think when you have these actionable things that, we can take away from this podcast in this season that I'm looking forward to incorporating into my day to day.
I love it. And
And
I
how
would
about,
say yeah,
yeah.
I would say my MedEd moment is you, the listener. It is the challenge that this podcast is in understanding exactly what are the needs of academic faculty and how can we serve you to realize that education is really the coolest thing ever and how to engage in that. Bringing a smile to your face when you have learners in your spaces and you being able to really say, hey, I actually did some good today. So we will pause right there and we will
Perfect.
see you next time on the next episode of MedEd Matter. Have a good day.